Welcome to Legacy Conversations, recorded right here at the barn on Collimer Road. I'm your host, Mark Modulewski. Our mission, to educate, inspire, and entertain. Thanks for tuning in. Let's get started. Jeannette, welcome to Legacy Conversations. Thanks for coming.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited for you to be here.
Yeah.
I can't believe you've never been to the barn until today.
I know, 4 years almost, and I haven't been here, and I've been to Syracuse, well, at least once a year for the last 4 years.
Yeah, exactly. So I usually start by trying to think about where we met, and you and I definitely met through the Ag Society, I
Absolutely,
believe.
yep.
So just a little background, about like 10, 12 years ago, I was in Lead, New York. I had been going to the New York State Agricultural Society meeting for years. I was introduced by a prior mentor of mine, and I got into Lead, and my capstone project for Lead was to get involved with the Ag Society and see if we can help modernize the Ag Society. I walked through the chairs, became president. As part of the presidential piece, I needed to find the greatest next person, and that was you, which we had courted you forever. And so that's when we met, right? When we first met was through the Ag Society.
Correct. So I had started with the Ag Society. I don't think you were on the board yet when I was on the board. I think there was a couple of years where we just kind of saw each other in passing, and then you joined the board. I think it was already 2 years into it, and then you came on. We made a lot of very big changes. I think changes that we needed. Always change is uncomfortable, and that's the hardest part for many people, especially people in agriculture, because our roots grow really deep, right? We have a lot of time where we've been doing things for so long, and this was a big change.
Yeah,
and I think it was a great change too, because it not only brought us into modern times and changing how we do things. The response from our members was also very, very welcoming. So I think we did a good job with it.
Yeah, and it's, for me, I remember being on the board saying, how do we balance tradition and change, right? We wanted to keep the tradition of the Ag Society that's been around almost 200 years, but we needed to modernize it a little bit. And we had a little bit of pushback from some folks because the idea of, well, this is the way it's always been, right? We challenged that. We challenged the status quo.
Correct.
We started asking folks to actually be involved if you're on a committee. We looked at the facilities that we were at and saying, is this the type of place that we wanted to be at? We started thinking about growth. We talked about term limits.
Term limits was a big one.
For turnover and getting fresh ideas and getting new people on the board, but balancing the idea of having some folks who had some experience.
You need the experience as well. You can't just turn over a board every couple of years and expect
Start
it to
over.
Right. And expect it to be successful.
Right.
And I think that's one of the great things about the Ag Society is that we are approaching 200 years, 200 years strong.
Yeah.
And we look forward to another 200 years and beyond.
Yeah.
And again, you know, with me being president, one of my things is to showcase more about what we do.
Yeah.
About our mission, which is farms. It's the annual forum, which is in January. It's our Ambassador Scholars program for that sweet spot of 18 to 25, because both of us were in Lead, and you can't start Lead until you're after you're 25.
Right.
And they prefer to have a little bit of career experience under your belt before you join it, because it is such a big leadership development course.
Yeah.
And it's a 2-year commitment.
Yeah.
So this is really great because it is also a 2-year commitment for our youth, but it's in January where they're partnered with a mentor.
Yeah.
And then they can have the experience in the summer meeting, which is a lot more intimate. So it's just the board, just the chairs, a few extra people instead of, the 400 or 500 people that attend our forum.
Yeah. So if you think about it, so when you look at our missions again, just so everybody knows, you've got this acronym. You have FARMS, FARMS. So you've got F, which is the forum, and that's our annual meeting that we've had for 190 years. We get together. It's a diversified group of folks who are directly in production agriculture, people who support agriculture, people who teach and educate on agriculture,
government,
people who come in from all over. and we have anywhere from 250 to 500 people that get together to listen to speakers and exhibit. It's a great day. It's what Commissioner Ball has said. It's like the who's who of agriculture gets together is like a big fraternity to say hi to people, right? That's what happens.
I love the family reunion. Like the
Family
family
reunion.
reunion is how I experienced it my first time.
Yeah,
And that's what made me want to step onto the board.
yeah,
And that's what continues to be my why of to lead and to continue to grow our mission in our organization.
yeah, yeah. So you got that F, and that's a big piece. You've got the forum. Then you have A, which is the ambassadors, like you were talking about, engaging young folks, kind of college or early on in their career, to meet more people in agriculture that are in leadership positions to help drive them forward, right? Because
Right.
we need the next generation.
Oh, we do.
And it's hard, number one, a little bit in our state to get the kids to stick around. I know kids sound silly, but the younger people to stick around, stay involved in agriculture because they have other options. So that gives them that connection. Tell me about R. What's R?
Recognition.
Recognition.
So every year we honor several different categories. So we do Cap Creole, we do new farmers or new people coming into agriculture.
Yep.
We do the Century Awards, which is a big one,
Yeah.
recognizing that historical piece. We also do ag promotions and Cap Creole, which is the media supported, type of outreach. We also have the safety award, and we have the
It's funny because you and I have done every one of those awards for a decade, and it's
or
hard, but-
more.
or more. But basically, there's a half a dozen awards that have
Yeah.
become history, have become part of our tradition, where we recognize people in agriculture who have done extraordinary things to promote agriculture over the previous year. So you've got the Century Farms, and then you've got Next Generation, and you've got Safety, and we're just trying to give some recognition to the people that are in our community.
That do amazing work.
That do amazing work, right?
And that,
go unnoticed sometimes.
not only go unnoticed, but farmers are humble, right? They
Yeah.
don't like to have a lot of spotlight shined on to them. They also don't like to be self-promoters
Yeah,
because, nobody really likes to be a self-promoter, but we are supporting agriculture in New York State. We are that group that continues to feed, support, grow, for New York and beyond. And
Yeah.
I think that we need to recognize, and that's the important part of the R.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. So we've got F, A, R, and then M,
M is messaging.
messaging.
So we like to make sure that the message gets out, right?
Yeah.
If we're not sharing our message, whether it be a farm or an ag service or you being financial, helping succession planning,
Yeah,
there is no next generation. There
Right.
is no 200 years.
Yeah.
So it's that message that's really important. And so we like to tell that story. We like to tell how the farm has gotten there, and that's one of the things that we changed along with your tenure with us. Is we, instead of having people come up and read from a script, now we do a 5 to 7 minute video,
Yeah.
and it's much more engaging. It changes up the day. You get to see the farm
Yeah.
instead of just hearing. So it also connects with a whole different demographics in the room, right?
Yeah.
Because some of us are visual, some of us are audio. Some of us like to see things.
yeah,
And yeah, so that was
Yeah.
a huge change, and it was great.
because really in agriculture, you have a couple of different groups. You have the folks who know that it's there, are passionate about it, and are there to support it. Then you have the other people that think food comes from a grocery store, right? And then it's everything in between.
Yeah.
So for us, that messaging is not only to the folks who are in, around, and supporting agriculture, but also to the consumers, because every now and then we'll get some request that somebody will say, hey, what does the New York State Ag Society think about this, right? So being very deliberate to support the people inside, making sure that if the consumer comes in and sees it, they see agriculture in a positive light.
Correct.
Right? There's a lot that goes into that messaging piece because, I used to I've told the story before that when I was younger, my kids and my dad went fishing in the oceans in Delaware on vacation. And we caught some fish, and the captain of the boat cut up some fillets, put them in a Ziploc bag, And we drove him home, and me and the boys were excited about, hey, let's eat this fish. And my dad was there, and my mom's like, well, you can't eat that. And I'm like, why can't we eat it? She goes, well, it's not fresh. I'm like, Ma, it doesn't get any fresher. Like, we just caught it like an hour ago. She's like, well, I'm like, well, where would you get it? She's like, well, you'd have to get it from like a fish market or a supermarket. And in her mind, it made a whole bunch of sense, right? And in my mind, it's like, yeah, but we just harvested it and brought it back. This is the freshest you can be. And I'm not saying that to be negative about my mom. I think there's a lot of folks who believe
There's a ton of folks.
they don't understand that that product has to start somewhere in a farm, get processed somehow to get to the shelf, right? Agriculture is way bigger than just the grocery store or even the farm market.
Correct.
Yeah.
So it all goes back to a producer, right?
Yeah.
It starts at the farm level. And COVID was really a fun time because, there was so much disruption.
Yeah.
And so many people wanted to do a backyard, farm or a hobby farm. And then they didn't realize how much work goes into it.
Yeah.
It's 24/7, 365. If you have livestock, it's an everyday event. It's several times a day. And, I think people had a new appreciation. But, the other great thing about COVID is the grocery stores got recognized for all of their work.
Yeah.
The truck drivers got recognized for all of their work.
Right.
I think the biggest fail was that the farmers didn't get recognized because we did not have the opportunity to social distance. We were, we had to have all of our teams come every day to take care of our animals, to produce our products and get them out the door.
Yeah. It's a different definition of essential worker, right? Because
is.
back then I was deemed essential because I help manage money, right? Mm-hmm. And that's a big portion of what we do. And we were essential because we were under banking and financial. Obviously, it's important, but not nearly as important as, like, we'll talk about later. Like, your family is in the chicken and egg business. It's kind of like, well, like, that's a big deal. So if all of a sudden we're like, hey, listen, you have to have half the team members and they can't come there, well, then production goes down and there's less food on the shelves.
But we also have regulations that states that the animals have to be cared for every day and that the eggs have to be collected every day. They can't sit in the barn for 24 hours.
Right.
So we had to have the staff, and we don't have an operation that runs 24/7. We don't a processing plant that doesn't run 24/7. So we couldn't say, okay, only half of the team show up. We'll slow down the machines and we'll catch up somehow.
Yeah, it doesn't work that way.
It was everybody facing forward with your mask on. And I think that was a big fail. Yeah. Because, we did not get the recognition. And those processing plants that did get positive, come positive of COVID, they had a lot of negative light shined on them.
Right.
But hello,
like,
you
what
eat
else
3
are they
times
gonna
a
do?
day.
I know.
I know. Like, you eat 3 times a day, most people.
Yeah.
And the food has to come from somewhere.
Yeah.
And it's just, it's just one of those areas where the messaging is always so important.
Yeah.
Right. And sharing that. And I think people have a new light. You were just talking about your mom, and no offense, Mom.
Yeah.
But I had a debate with somebody with a PhD.
Yeah.
Who didn't realize that
Obviously
their food
educated.
didn't come through the grocery store. And they say that people are 2 to 3, even 4 generations removed from the farm. Yeah. And they just don't understand the science behind it, the amount of work that goes into it. Again, the science. I mean, everything we do is based on science. Yeah. And I think that that's one area that we'd like to have our ambassadors know is we need really solid people, right? We need people who are interested in science, interested in getting their hands dirty. And that's a great field. We have trades that, are going unfilled, and, I think that the tradespeople are going to start making like doctor money, because
there's no doubt about it.
If you can't find a
supply
plumber,
and demand. That's just what it is.
Everything is supply and demand, right? It's a basic supply and demand. And if you can't find a plumber and you need to get work done,
the cost becomes less important.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and I think there's folks like Mike Rowe and some of those people have been pointing to it forever, but I think what the Ag Society is in particular trying to do, and Lead New York certainly is doing it, is getting rid of this this mindset that the farmer is the guy with the pitchfork and the
Here,
overalls
chick, 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 chick.
yeah, next to his wife who's shorter in a little dress, and then their two kids, their little boy, their little girl, their dog, and there's a picket fence in the background.
Right.
Because now production agriculture, even though this can be seen as a negative, is a big business. There's a lot of money on the line. There's a lot of people that depend on that for work. And it's way more complicated than, hey, we grow corn,
Correct.
or we grow pumpkins, or we grow apples, or we grow chickens, or we grow cows. It's just so much more than that. I have farms that I work with that have 6, 7, 8,000 cows in one location. There's chicken farms that have 1 million birds in one location, right? So if something goes wrong, you don't lose one or two. You lose 50,000.
Correct.
And then people think they'll be like, oh, it's no big deal. It's no. Think about 50,000 chickens not being there the next day. Like that's a big deal.
But it's also the team's hard work
Yeah.
every day
To keep it going.
To then lose them.
Yeah.
Right? And people don't think that. They think, oh, well,
They think they're just
governmental-
apathetic. It's no
Yeah.
big deal. Or we
Yeah.
don't care about them. But
Yeah.
they do care about
Oh
their
my
work.
gosh. When we lose a couple, just to normal,
Yeah.
process, the team gets really upset about it. It's that 18 weeks that they have to raise them to get the first egg. And then it's that period of time that we raise them until, the eggshell quality goes down. It's the day in and day out work.
They're invested in those animals.
They are
care about them.
invested. A lot of them think of them like they're cats and dogs, right?
Yeah.
They come in, they talk to them. We have a couple employees who sing to them. This gets me very emotional. So my dad, who's been retired for, I don't know, 8 years or so, always does different projects with me. We go meet some neighbors. We go to different events at different farms. And one of the PCA's, poultry care attendants, came up to us and said, our girls are going to have their first transfer from the cage-free poultry pullet farm to the layer house. And I had to take a couple minutes because it's a really sad day for me. And my dad and I are starting to tear up as she's telling us. So I'm going to try not to get there.
Okay.
I'm the emotional one of the family. So she pulls up a chair and she's talking to all of them. And she's saying, okay, girls, now it's your time to really shine. I took really good care of you.
Yeah.
The team down here took care of you. Now it's your time to lay really good eggs, lay good quality, produce, and the next team will take care of you. And she tells that story, and it's very emotional.
Yeah.
So because of that, the manager had found out, and they moved her to be with them, to be with the first flock
she
that goes
followed
through.
them.
So she ended up following them. And then, so she's still up there, and she tells that story to every new hire and says, you become one with the chicken, right? You become that person who takes care of them, the chicken tender, as we like to say, the person who cares.
Yeah.
And you have to show that. And I think that's the part that so many people don't understand. It's that romanticism of the farm, the chick, the pitchfork.
Yeah.
But big poultry or big ag is like that.
Yeah.
They care for their animals. I mean,
Yeah.
we're in a business to produce,
Yeah.
right? Just like all the big box stores came in and all the small mom and pop stores are no longer.
Right.
It's just economies of scale.
Yeah. So just for everybody who doesn't know, your family, the Kreher family, has a pretty big poultry operation. So give me just a little bit of background on like size and scope of the operation and like what you guys do.
Sure. So we started out in 1924. So we just celebrated 100 years.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. We started out as a very small hobby farm, sustainable. So we had chickens and cows and pigs. And my great-grandfather just fell in love with farming. And then he ended up falling in love with chickens. And so then we became a breeder, a poultry, hatchery. And then as the next generation came upon the business and worked in the business, they wanted to continue to grow and expand.
Yep.
And there wasn't a lot of money in hatching. So they ended up starting a layer farm. And so we moved the operation.
Because chickens lay eggs.
Yeah, because chickens lay eggs. Well, this breed lays eggs.
Yes.
So there are two, which most people don't know.
Yep.
There's the broiler that
Yep.
is for table meat, and
Yep.
then the shell eggs.
The layers.
And we started to produce like a strain of chickens, and they were really productive. And then we continued to grow, and today we have a little over 2.5 million chickens.
I mean, it's pretty, like, for you, it seems normal, but for the average person to say, well, there's a farm in Western New York, somewhere close to Buffalo, between Buffalo and Rochester, and there's 2 million birds that are in the
Well,
process.
they're on 3 different locations.
3 different locations,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But you cover these couple million birds, and they're in the process of getting raised and then laying eggs every day. So help people understand from the time that they hatch and they're a chick, how long before they lay their egg?
Okay, 18 weeks.
18 weeks. So it's a pretty quick, God did a good job designing those little suckers, right? Because it's 18 weeks.
Yep. So it takes 21 days to hatch them.
Yep.
18 weeks to grow them to become layers.
Yep.
Whereas meat for broilers is 8 to 10 weeks.
Yeah.
So they can get 2 or 3 cycles in before we get our first egg. So
Right.
just as a comparison.
Yep.
And then, we hold them until their eggshell quality starts to decrease because we're regulated by the government. So when the shell quality and the interior quality starts to decrease, then they move on.
And and each chicken gives 1 egg per day.
Correct. A happy, healthy chicken
Yep.
in a commercial setting will lay 1 egg a day.
Okay, which is pretty neat.
Yes.
So then you're collecting those eggs and you're washing them and you're boxing them, and they're for distributions for stores around
Yep.
the
Stores,
Northeast, New
food
York,
service. Yep.
right? Whoever who wants to buy them, which is kind of neat. So nobody really likes to talk about it, but it's kind of like dairy. Like I do a lot with dairy. Well, the cows are raised, and then they get pregnant. They drop their first calf. They start to milk just like any other mammal. They milk for a while until their milk supply goes down. They dry them off. They're already pregnant again. They start over, and then when that cycle gets to a point where it's not quite as productive, kind of like the eggshell, then they transition to the last phase. And it's the same thing with chickens, I would imagine. So you guys produce these eggs for profit, and then chickens produce something else every day, don't they?
Yes, they produce
A lot of it.
poop.
A lot of poop, right? One of the things I thought was pretty interesting about chickens is that their manure is like super, super valuable because of the nitrogen content, right? Mm-hmm. So is that like that's another product for you guys?
It is another product. So we have a fully sustainable farm. So our chickens produce poop, which our
Yep.
poop is then put into the field so that we have a viable yield on our products that we grow. So years ago when I was a child, we had different style barns.
Yep.
And the neighbors hated us because we had a lot of odor and we had a lot of flies. And, when the neighbors would complain, my dad would go over and have a conversation, and we'd say, yeah, we have the same problem in our house. Like we have 200 acres around my parents' house.
Yeah.
So it's that, how do you be a good neighbor?
Yeah.
And so we started changing the barns. We started going to Europe to find out how they compost, and we brought that technology back and we started using it. One of the first in the country to use it. My father's really mechanically inclined, so we were able to take an old barn and build it so that we could put different nutrients that are needed for different soils and blend it for farms for commercial use. And then so some of our product goes back into our own land, some of
Sure.
it goes to other farmers, some of it goes to golf courses.
Yeah.
Because
Big
how
deal.
do
Our
you, how
golf
do you
course
get
uses
those
it. Yeah.
how do you get those nice green tight greens?
Yeah.
It's having all the right nutrients into
Yeah.
the soil.
Yeah, and I think it's pretty interesting because the more people I speak to in agriculture, and I've been doing it for a little while, it's not just these folks get chicks, raise them until they lay eggs, and then they lay the eggs, and then they're done with them, right? Sustainability is you're growing some of your own feed, you're using the manure to help replenish the soil so that becomes productive. It's a big cycle. And the word sustainable is very different for everybody, and it means something different. But you can't have a couple million birds live somewhere and not put something back into the land. Otherwise, it'll just take everything out of it. So farming in and of itself is pretty neat.
Right.
Because
It's very sustainable.
It's very sustainable. And people think that it's not because they see this barn, but how many eggs do you produce a day on average?
About 2 million.
2 million eggs. So if you're producing 2 million eggs a day and you've been there for 100 years, then obviously you're doing something right. Because if you were doing the energy it takes to produce that, you're obviously pulling something from the land and you have to be giving as much back. Otherwise, it becomes not useful.
Yeah, so we have agronomists who check the soil, and because part of our operation is regenerative and organic, we need to follow different rules and can't use pesticides and herbicides. And so, soil temperature is really important. And so a lot of people get really, anxious as soon as they get that first sun, right?
Yeah.
That first
Especially
sunny
now
day,
in the spring.
70,
Yeah.
it's springtime. Okay, I'm ready to plant.
Yeah.
And then we have a frost.
Yeah.
Or the nights get really cold. And it's like, well, in New York State, you really can't, in our area of New York State, you really can't start planting until Memorial Weekend. And people tend to forget that, except for if they're cold crops, right? But the energy that comes with that, you also have to look at what's going on in the soil.
Yeah.
So the seeds will not start to do their thing until the soil reaches a certain temperature. So we're taking the temperature of the soil. I know it sounds silly, but we need to make sure that the seed is going to be viable.
But if you think about it, that's the science behind it, right? So you buy this seed and you buy these pallets of seed, right? It's not like a bucket like you go to the store. It's pallets of seed, and then it goes in one at a time, and then it gets put to a specific depth. It has to be at the specific temperature and some moisture so it'll germinate.
Correct.
And if it doesn't, if it's too cold or if it's too wet, it rots.
Correct.
And it doesn't come up. So now you just spend all that time, energy, and money to get it in there, and then you got to replant it. And it happens everywhere, right? Like sometimes it is what it is. It's part of the business. But there's so much technology that goes into getting an egg. There's so much behind it. Like we could do an entire hour on the agronomy on how you grow corn and soybeans and then how it gets processed so it gets put into quote unquote chicken feed and the diets that you guys feed and all that stuff.
Because the diets are based upon her age, the eggshell quality. I mean, these are all the things we look at. We make sure that she doesn't have any, there's no salmonella, there's no any kind of other bacterias or anything. So it's very different being commercial than somebody who has a backyard hobby farm.
Yeah, no doubt. And chickens, birds in particular, they're not like super hardy, right? So like a cow can get a temperature or can not feel good, and you can get the vet there and you can kind of fix it. But you don't generally, from my understanding, you don't lose like one bird. Like if one bird gets sick, then you lose a lot, right?
Correct. So it's that herd mentality, right?
Yeah.
And that's why we vaccinate our chickens for popular avian diseases.
Yeah.
Chickens get chicken pox. So we have a pox.
Who would have known? Who would have thought it?
So they get a pox vaccine so that they don't get it, because if one gets it, many of them will get it. There's some other bronchial diseases that they are susceptible to, which, that's why our employees can't come to work when they're sick or when they have a temperature, because there are some things that will transfer and could get our birds sick. So again, it's all that science behind it. And so we have to have a team who has science background. So we have somebody who has poultry health. We have agronomists. We have people who really understand plants, for our vegetable operation.
Yeah. So, okay, I don't want to spend a ton of time on the avian flu and all that type of stuff. Obviously, there's been a challenge in that market, and I think most people understand the basic difference between organic and conventional. But help me understand this idea in the chicken world. You've got free range, you've got cage free, you've got traditional. And I visited a few of them, right? And certain people that means something different to them. But I visited one in Canada where it was free range. and there was this big section. There was 50,000 birds in this big barn, and there was a little door that they could walk outside if they wanted to, and there was a big kind of caged area outside, to kind of keep them in an area so they don't go anywhere. And there's 13 birds outside, and there's 47,000 birds in one corner, all right next to each other, right? And I remember asking the guy, and he goes, well, those are the free range birds because they can go wherever they want. They have the autonomy to go in this big, huge open space, inside, outside, raining, whatever else. But any eggs that came from that place, would go into the free range piece. So help me understand that. Like, what are the differences between some of those things?
So a lot of it's marketing.
Yes.
Right. But a lot of it is there's two categories, right?
Okay.
So you have the housing. So the housing type determines certain things.
Okay.
And then the feed determines certain
The
things.
other. Okay.
So anything that is organic has to be certified organic by a third party. So we have an independent contractor that comes in and talks about, tests to make sure that we don't have any pesticides or herbicides, anything that is not allowed
Right.
with the organic rule. And then they have to have access to outside. So we have some porches and they can go outside. So unlike your dog,
Yeah.
we'll take a dog for instance. Your dog likes to go outside and likes to kind of do some things. A chicken can smell their predators, right? They know that their predators are out there. There's not a lot of predators for a dog. For birds there are.
Yeah.
So they tend to kind of stay together. That survival of the fittest
Yeah.
is a thing. So they like to go outside, but they really don't always like to go outside. So if you watch them, they are a creature of habit. So they don't, they might sun themselves for a little while and dust bathe, but they're not going to want to be out there in the middle of winter. They're
Right.
not going to want to be out in a really bad storm,
Right.
rainstorm. They don't like noise. They don't like
No.
thunder.
Yeah.
So they're going to go to where their feed is. So we have conventional inside cages. So there's a pecking order, and that is well established, and it doesn't change. We have cage-free operations where they're not in cages. They, have a pecking order that continuously gets reestablished. And then we have free range by some Amish and Mennonite families that are at pasture. And so each of those have different levels. And it's harder to have those as free range, so there tend to be smaller flocks.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's the challenge, right? Certain people want to have something because of the marketing behind it. Some of them do it because they think it's healthier. Some of it they think it's better for the animals. The great thing about agriculture is we try to produce products that people like. So
Correct.
whatever's most important to you, if you're willing to spend a little bit more because you want this, then you can do that.
Right.
And I just always think it's interesting not to choose one side or the other, but like a farm like yours that's so big is looking at it and saying, well, what does the market desire? And whatever the market desires, we do our best to produce it at a reasonable price. And there's more inputs to some of those, obviously, right? If you're 100% organic free range, it's going to be a little less productive than if we
And
put
more
them
manpower.
and way more manpower, so it's more expensive than it is if we're in a facility where they're well looked after and cared for, like you talked about in the past, but we know where they are, right?
Correct.
They're fed
Right.
and they're
Yep.
watered and they're healthy.
Yep. The
And-
egg gets put on, the egg gets laid and it rolls onto a belt. The belt takes it away.
Right.
Cage free. Somebody has to get on their hands and knees and
Go pick up eggs.
Go pick up eggs.
Yeah.
Sometimes they'll lay in the system and sometimes they lay on the floor. So, and those floor eggs have to be gathered and they get put into a different area. Whereas if they're inline system, they will go right directly in, but they don't always lay in the right spot. So now somebody has to come through and pick the egg up and put it in the right
there.
spot.
Yeah.
So again, and then at a pasture, totally different. So, they have all this space to lay an egg.
Yeah.
We also got to make sure that they're trying to go into their nest boxes and lay their
And you got to
their-
keep them safe too, right? Because
Correct.
there's weasels and raccoons and coyotes and all that type of stuff that likes them because they're tasty.
and turkey vultures and
Right.
and
Yeah. The aerial predators are crazy.
yeah. I mean, it's all over.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's neat. So you talked a little bit about vegetable operation. So you grow you grow crops and commodities to help feed your birds, and then you have this vegetable operation. Tell me about that.
So it's a fourth and fifth generation farm that is become part of our operation, and so we grow some vegetables for local grocery stores and food processing, and yeah, so it's we were the Corn King last year, a couple times in the last, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 years,
Yeah.
and so we have a team that comes in and helps us with our vegetable operation. We have a core team that starts the flowers because we also do Easter flowers and Christmas flowers. So
It's pretty cool. I mean, your family's operation, I've always admired from afar before I had met you because everybody knows Krehrs for their eggs, but it's so much more than that, right? There's fruits and vegetables. I think you did pumpkins do you do pumpkins still? And then there's
well,
flower,
squash. We do squash, yeah.
Yeah, there's so many different avenues to it. So it's super diversified.
And you can't have all your eggs in one basket.
Yeah.
All
No pun
yoking,
intended.
all yoking aside.
Oh my gosh.
Oh,
How
I can
bad
go
was
on.
that?
I can go on. But seriously, you can't have, in order to be viable and sustainable, you can't have just one area of production. You can't just have one customer, as most people know.
Yeah.
Everything changes so quickly that you have to make sure that the operation is diversified.
Yeah. So tell me about your role at the farm because it's kind of unique and I've learned a little bit more over the years, but tell me about what you're doing.
So I came back to the farm just to do one project when I was student
Yeah.
teaching and substituting, and then I ended up staying for the last 18 or so years.
Yeah.
And before I was administrative operations manager, which I had customer service, accounting, and HR kind of under my umbrella. And then I decided to go back fully into HR. So for HR, I do some of the training. I do a lot of projects. I do a lot of our H2A program. I oversee a lot of that. And then on the other side, I do all of our community outreach. So our community engagement. I'm on several boards. I do a lot of, I'm that career face that goes to the events.
Yeah.
I handle all the sponsorships and that kind of thing.
Yeah. Because when you run an organization like that, obviously it depends on people, right? So you need an HR, you need a department of people.
Yes.
Because you have to care about them. Without those folks, if they don't show up and do a good job, then kind of everybody's in trouble.
Yes.
The bigger you get, the more land you cover, then the more opportunity it is for neighbors to say, hey, what are you doing? So you have to have a community outreach, right?
Correct.
To be involved in those things.
And we've always done that, which is
Yeah.
one thing that I love about our family. Like, we always do things for the community. So whether it be our churches or our community events or our chambers,
Yeah.
we try to keep it in the food realm,
Sure.
right? Or our direct impact of odors. So like I told you at the beginning, my father and I went out and met some of the neighbors. So we just go and, how's everything? What's going on? We started this in COVID,
Yeah.
where we actually went out to the neighbors. Normally they just call us and say, hey, but it's been a great outreach.
Yeah.
And it's nice to put a name with a face and, hey, if you need anything, give us a call.
Yeah. Yeah. It's neat. So what's without getting too much into it, the poultry industry over the last several years has had some challenges, right? There's been a lot of birds around the world and around the U.S. that have died, which has changed some things. But tell me about like what's next? Where does the family think? You're not going to just stay where you are. You've never stayed where you were. So what's the next thing? What's the next thing for the family farm? Do you think?
I think we are going to, agriculture is our life, right?
Yeah.
We love agriculture. We do really well with chickens. We have a great team that does compost and crops. So I think we're just going to continue to stay in that. We might change some markets. So, we ended up going into some other markets of recent, where some of the off-grade items are still a viable. Somebody still had to plant them, right?
Yeah.
Somebody still had to tend to all these vegetables, but they might not be perfect.
Right.
And guess what? Nobody's perfect. So
No.
how can our vegetables and fruits be perfect, right? So that was an avenue that we started to go into. Just making sure that we're changing with the times. So, the rule is that, all farms have to be cage free. So, we're working into that because there's not, the supply and demand piece of it, but the cost, right?
Yeah.
So, you know, you
So it's
think,
adapting to what people want,
correct.
legislation, finding new markets. So the way in which you raised chickens 50 years ago has changed, and
Oh,
probably it'll
definitely.
continue to change.
Correct.
The vegetable piece reminds me, I do some work with some fruit farmers. So everybody sees these apple orchards and they just say, well, all the apples come off, and somebody spits on them, shines them, and they put them in the thing nice and they're all perfect. But some of those go to juice, and there's a reason why they go to juice,
Yes.
right? Because no one would buy that apple if they saw it, right?
Correct.
That
Yep.
way. Or, if it hits the ground, then there's nothing you can
Could
do
do
with
about
it,
it. Yep.
right? But there may be an option to become even more efficient, and the farm's continuing to look at ways to expand markets and become more efficient. Because it's really interesting, and I think most people in agriculture will know that the farms today, everybody says, well, they're getting bigger, but they're doing more with less, like
Oh,
significantly more with less.
correct. So there was a paper that was put out, I don't know, probably about 5 or 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And it talked about poultry
Yeah.
and how to produce eggs and how much water we used to use and how much water we use now.
Yeah.
Huge conservation.
Right.
How much feed, how much, I mean, it was, I don't know, 12 pages long of how much energy, we've changed to LED lights. So
Yeah.
that has been a huge savings.
Yeah.
We don't have to change light bulbs as much because they
Even the
have,
barn construction, it stays
the barn
warmer. It
construction.
stays more. There's more air. Like in an area where there's a lot of chickens, there has to be good airflow.
Correct.
Right.
Yep.
So if they're designed differently, the airflow is better. Like everything's just significantly more efficient.
Correct. And we have to change with the times, right? So not a lot of people want to do hard farm work, and so we have to modernize. We have to put in robots, and we have to put in, conveyors and means to do a lot of the tasks that were once done by hand 50 years ago and automate them so that a machine is doing them, and it'll be easier for, the person, and
Yeah.
it'll be easier to find people who want to do the jobs, because they are really rewarding jobs, and we have phenomenal people who work for us.
Yeah.
And I'm
Well,
so blessed.
And what's so amazing is it's not just like everybody thinks like an organization like that. It's just like people who work with chickens. But there's people in an office, there's people that are marketing, there's people in packaging, there's people in HR, there's people who weld, and there's people who turn wrenches, and there's people who fix trucks, and there's people who fix fans, and there's people who build things. Like the reality is the operation is so involved in the community that you can literally say, well, I'm a plumber and a fabricator, and you work at Kreher. Right?
I need you.
Right, I need you, or you can say, well, I'm a carpenter, I work at Kreher, right? Or
Yeah.
I'm a diesel mechanic, oh, I work at Kreher, or I play in the dirt, oh, I work at Kreher. Like it's not just, well, I'm a farmer.
Correct.
Like, the business is so much. It's a manufacturing business that just happens to love agriculture.
Correct.
Yeah, it's so neat.
Yeah.
It's so neat.
And I just want to circle back because we didn't finish farms for New
Yeah,
York
oh,
State
yeah, yeah,
Ag
we
Society,
didn't.
because we gotta. I started.
we gotta
I
get a clip
started
for
on
that.
Steward, so
Yeah. So Levi, one of the things in the beginning we talked about was farms, FARMS. So if we cut a short, we need to cut a short on the S part as well. So okay, so farms, FARMS. F is for the forum, A is for the ambassadors, R is for recognition, M is for messaging, and S is for stewardship. So
Correct.
So help me understand stewardship.
So it's that stewardship for the land. It's that stewardship for agriculture. It's that stewardship towards sustainability, right? So it's that whole message of those S's.
Yeah.
It's how do we tell our story
Yeah.
in a sustainable environment? How do we become better stewards of our practice, of our love for our animals and our love for our land?
Yeah.
And how do we continue to make it better?
Yeah.
The land, the animals better than when we got them, right? It's that forward thinking piece of, okay, so each farm has X amount of years. We have just 101 right now. How is it going to be in 100 years? How is
Yeah.
it going to be in 200 years? How can we make sure that stewardship is there? Same thing with Ag Society. The New York State Ag Society is approaching 200 years. We want to make sure that we're still relevant for the next 200 years and beyond.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think stewardship is kind of one of those words that people don't really grasp, but the definition that you're using is we want to leave it better for the next generation.
Yes.
So the Ag Society is focusing on how do you tell that message and help people understand that stewardship's super important to the community, right?
Yes.
To the agricultural community. Because some people just say, well, this sounds crass, but we're raping and pillaging the land. It's like there's nobody who cares about the land more than the farmers.
Right. If
like,
they don't get a
nobody
yield,
does.
then all that work is for nothing.
Right. So they're trying to leave it for the next generation to be able to make it even better for the next generation. So when someone sees someone take out a tree or plant a tree, one of them might be super, they would say, I can't believe you cut down that tree. And it's like, yeah, but for the productivity of the field, that's what's best. And then you plant a hedgerow and they're like, well, why are you planting them right there? Because it blocks my view. It's like, but that's what's best for the land, right? We don't just willy-nilly just say, hey, let's cut stuff down, right? Or plant things or whatever.
Or we need to take out some of the dead trees or some of the trees that are, taking over or, that are not viable for our area. Some of the ash that have become,
the ash borer,
have died that are still in the woodlands and, taking up space and, trying to make sure that it's better so that the other trees and other green foliage can survive.
Yeah. It's really interesting. I mean, I've always enjoyed talking to you, and I want to keep doing that. And I think because we share the Ag Society, we share a passion for agriculture. We come out of a slightly different area because of the way that you grew up. But you're in HR, and I'm kind of in HR because I support HR that way,
absolutely.
which is kind of neat. And then it's this, this big organization, and then just being part of an organization. Like we're super lucky to have the Kreher family in New York, right? Because there's not a lot of big folks who grow chickens anymore, right?
Correct.
There's, whatever, a half a dozen or whatever families across the country that does it.
Well, it's still a little bit bigger than that. I mean, it was like, I don't know, 10,000 when I was a kid.
Yeah.
We're not going to talk about my age.
Yeah. Right. A few years ago.
And, now there's, I don't know, 86, 100.
But it's like,
commercial
there's
producers.
A couple dozen that do like 50 or 60% of the eggs.
Correct.
Right? Like the big ones do. And then there's a bunch of little ones around, and there's some other egg farms in the Syracuse area that kind of do that stuff. But the big ones kind of lead the way, right? It's kind of like they push the way and everybody else kind of follows. And
with a lot of regulation and oversight and that kind of thing. But, part of it is, what does the consumer want? Like, how do we best support what consumer needs and desires are? And that's what we always look for. Because, we can produce pretty much anything. We just need to know the path. And, it's not like, buying a house when you have to convert a barn. It's, you usually have to tear down the barn and start from scratch.
Right.
So again, making sure that we're building and growing in the right direction is key.
Yeah.
And that's sometimes the unknown as well.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's very difficult for folks to understand the idea that what you said, we can grow whatever it is that you want, but there's a cost to that. So there's this idea of how do you have solid, plentiful food at a reasonable price, and then how do you have that food that today might be designer, quote unquote food, but in the past, wasn't available. Today it's designer, in the future it'll be the norm, but it takes time and money to get to that, right?
Correct.
Like it just doesn't work. And if we want everything to be organic, not to say anything negative about organic, well, then at least initially for a decade or two, we're going to become less productive because we haven't figured it out, which means costs are going to go up. It just is what it is.
And not everything can be grown organically.
Right.
You got to look at the soils. You have to look at, the process. So in order for our chickens to be organic, they have to be organic from day one. Right. So the day they hatch, anything and everything that they consume or are around exposed to. So cleaning for our barns, that has to be organically approved.
Right.
The feed has to be organically certified. So, it's the process from day one. So, when you have them for a couple of years, everything has to be 100% organic. Yeah. It's not like you could just flip on the switch and say, okay, well,
we're going to go organic
we're going to be organic today because we need more organic. No, they had to be organic, 18
years.
weeks ago
Well, to get the process takes years to get it. Then once you get it, it's like, well, to start these birds out, how long does a layer generally lay before they become
About
not as
80 to
efficient?
90 weeks total.
Okay. Yeah. So quite a while. Just under 2 years.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, but that transition takes time, right? Like a lot of
Yes.
people say, well, why can't the farm just go organic tomorrow? It's like, well, there's a lot of stuff that has to happen. There's supply chain that has to happen to make that
Oh,
happen. And
the cartons have to get changed. The cleaning of the processing room has to be changed.
training of the
Training in
employees.
place
Yeah.
has to be changed.
Yeah.
It's this whole process. The barn has to be changed.
Yeah.
Like because it's organic, they need to be cage free. So, that's the organic rule.
Right.
And they have to have access to outdoors. Well, our barns that don't have those two things, well, guess what? Now we have to
Construction project. And you got to find a contractor and he's got to show up. And,
Yes. And he's got to be biosecure, and the barn has to be
Yeah.
empty for a period of time, and we can't have another flock coming in, and our flocks are projected out for the next 2 to 3 years.
Right.
So I know exactly when my chickens are going to be hatched and when they're going to arrive at our farm,
Yeah.
and that's 3 years in advance. So
Yeah, so it's like moving an aircraft carrier, right?
Correct.
Like you can
Yeah.
do it, just takes time. And I mean, I think that biosecurity thing is an interesting thing. In the past, I could just walk into a farm, right? And some of the dairy farms that I know people, I could probably stop in the office, say hi, and walk into a barn. But more and more, and specifically in poultry, like you're not walking in that door, right? There's fences, it's locked. You're protecting those birds from us.
So
Right.
birds have a lot less of immune viability than most
Than a
animals.
mammal,
Yeah, exactly. So we have always locked down our operation. We have always made sure that we had biosecurity. We would clean the barns really good between and then sanitize them. With bird flu, which has been around. It's not
not
only been
new.
around since 2015. It's been
Yeah.
around. We had huge outbreaks in the 80s and 90s. It's just that it's been high path for so long, and it's big. It's taking out a lot of the industry. So our teams have to shower in, and it's full shower. And our maintenance team, God bless them, they sometimes take 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 showers a
The
day.
day.
We try not to have them go outside, so we have a team, which was another change in hiring. We have a team that is dedicated to outside the buildings, and we have a team that's dedicated to inside the buildings, and we try to not have the two cross inside the building unless we have to. It's that making sure that we are protecting the birds at all costs, because that's the last thing we want. I mean, I don't want to get there because I get very emotional.
Yeah.
Because it's not only our chickens, it's our people.
Yeah, exactly.
It's our people that have worked so hard,
Yeah.
and that's a part with the media attention and the discussion of things about why. I think that's a part with media that is missing, is that when you have to depopulate, it's not only the euthanization of the animals, it's all the hard work
Yeah.
and the mental health of our teams. And I just don't want to put our teams into that kind of mental space.
Yeah. Yeah, there's just such a human factor, such an emotional factor to raising animals that I don't people just think like they're assets. But like you said, if somebody just spent 6 months of their lives caring for this flock or this group of things, of these animals, and then all of a sudden something happens, then they're all gone. They just sit there and be, what did I just do for the last 6 months? And, it's different if it's an apple orchard or whatever else, but I've met with folks who they feel the exact same way.
Oh, yeah.
They planted an apple tree. It took them 3 years before they get apples, and then it gets apples for a little while, and then some frost comes in or something bad comes in, and they rip it out, and they just sit there and they're depressed. And people are like, "Well, is it just the money?" It's like, not just the money. It's all the
It's all
effort
the
that
hard
went.
work.
Yeah, it's all the effort that went into it. That's like you get halfway up the mountain and something knocks you halfway down, and then you got to start up again. And farming is an emotional, it's an emotional piece because there's a grind to it. Like the men and women who come in to shower in and shower out every day, like they have to, like, this is not a Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. We have Memorial Day off type job, right? This is a job where you're
Christmas
grinding
Day, Thanksgiving Day, my
right.
teams are there.
Yeah.
And it's
Somebody
and
has
it's
to be there.
and it's not just a team; it's all
The
teams,
team.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's the poultry care have to be there, the processing team has to be there, the sanitation team has to be there, the delivery team might have to be there. They might be able to have that day off. It depends. Our maintenance team has to be there, even if it's a shell, because things always break. It's
Right.
Mother Nature is another obstacle that we always have to face.
Yeah.
When we're planting, if we get too much rain, well, now the seeds are washed out. So we're always fighting Mother
Yeah.
Nature. And
Is it
although
too hot? Is it too cold? Is it too rainy? Is it too dry? Is it too wet?
yeah, and although we love her dearly, we
Yeah.
would like her to be a little bit more consistent.
No doubt.
Which is part of the other whole thing is, when you're growing something, if you have to pass it by or you have to plow it under, all that hard work, all that time.
Yeah.
That 80-hour window that we had to plant and then we had to do other things, cultivate and
Yeah.
weed and all of that stuff, and then to pass it by. Like, how devastating for the team to
Yeah.
know that, 200 acres of this vegetable is not going to make it to market because
Right.
Mother Nature or the processing plant window or the
Something happened.
or the
Out of your control.
bacteria. Yes,
Yeah.
totally out of our control.
Well, and I think not to spend a lot of time on the pricing piece, but a lot of folks would sit there and say, well, the farmer, the one that's setting the price that gets to the grocery store or to whatever else, and it's like that in every farm that I've ever been to, that's not the way it is, right? So you can plant all that stuff, get it to market, and then the reality of it is the price that the price that you're getting for it isn't the price that you need. Sometimes you make money, sometimes you lose money.
And unfortunately, you lose a lot of money in agriculture. There's very few years that you make money. Not to bring it up, but it was really interesting. We started watching Clarkson Farm. Have you ever seen that? The first year that he went full in, he was like, 40. I made $40 for the whole year
Pretty good.
for all the things that I did,
All the effort.
all
Yeah.
the effort, all the equipment, all
Yeah.
the seed, all the
But it's the thing. It's the thing that what people don't understand is that to keep it going, you have to have capex. You have to have continued investment.
yes.
So people will say, "Well, they made money. They just spent it on other things." It's like, yeah, but you spent it on the stuff that you needed
Need
to
to
continue,
invest. Yep,
right?
for the future.
So everybody gets some sort of reasonable pay for what they're doing. And then for any other manufacturing business, they would have to turn a profit on an annual basis. Otherwise, they wouldn't be in business.
Correct.
And in agriculture, you're forced to reinvest.
Correct.
Forced to take advantage of any tax law or any tax breaks or any grants so that you can continue to be relevant the next year.
Because the next year you might lose your shorts. I mean,
Yeah.
you might lose a lot of money,
Right.
and you need to have that. When you make money, you put back in. And what you're paying at the grocery store. Guess what? The grocery store has to make a profit. The truck driving company needs to make a profit.
Yep.
And then it goes, whatever is left goes back to the farm. So, we did make money, which I'm very glad because, we had to invest into the infrastructure for our biosecurity.
Right.
If we don't have biosecure farms, we might as well just close our doors today.
Right. But it's just an interesting thing is people it's hard to say to somebody, well, the price of the egg or the milk or whatever else in the grocery store, like you said. So the grocery store has a building and has people and has energy to keep it fresh and keep it on the shelf. Somebody brought it from the back to the front and labeled it and got it labeled in the computer, and somebody's there making sure that you check out and gathering carts and all that stuff. Well, then somebody had to drive it there.
Correct.
Well, then somebody owns that truck, and somebody has to have that truck driver, and it has to be
Cool
refrigerated.
space, yep.
Right. There's all of this type of stuff that has to happen. And then you go back, and somebody had to package it based on the rules and regulation on what has to be in there, and the packaging has to be sourced. And then the eggs not only have to be gathered and washed and graded and put inside there, and then you back up to the fact that there's an egg that got laid, and it's got to get there. And it's like, well, that's so expensive at the store. It's like, yeah, but it's not just the farmer involved in that process. There's a half a dozen other people that are involved in that process. And it's the same thing for a tomato or a strawberry or ice cream. One of the things I learned in lead, which I think I knew, but it became very apparent, is like you don't go to Wegmans in February and buy strawberries that are grown in the U.S. or
Correct.
grown in like New York.
Correct.
So somebody in the southern hemisphere is growing those.
Correct.
And then putting them on an airplane and shipping them here.
Correct.
Or a banana. You
yeah.
can buy a banana
All year round.
all year round in Wegmans right here in Syracuse, and they're not grown here. And they're probably not grown in Florida, right?
Yeah, they're not grown in here ever. They're not grown in New York ever.
Right. So like that has to get there. So somebody's like, man, bananas are expensive. It's like, well, that thing came from South America. Mm-hmm. Somebody grew that thing, picked it when it was green, shoved it into some sort of conditioned space, put it on an airplane, shoved it to the U.S., went through the USDA, got shipped to some region, put on a train, put on a truck, delivered to a grocery store, and brought out there.
Freshened to big yellow.
Got it to be yellow because no one wants to buy a green banana, right? And you're looking at it going, well, man, maybe this is more complicated. But most people walk in there and they look and they say, oh,
bananas.
I need a dozen eggs. That's some milk. I'd love to get some bananas, and maybe they'll make me a pizza. And, the ingredients come from all over the world.
Correct. Yep. And I think that, eggs historically have been a very cheap source of protein.
Yes.
Right. I went out for dinner last night because I'm staying in Syracuse, and a $9 glass of wine. Before it used to be $6. So
which still seems like a lot.
Which still seems like a lot because I could buy a decent bottle for twice that. But so that $9, $7 eggs, or that $9 glass of wine to go out. And
People
it just
put a different value on different things, don't they?
Yeah, and that's the part that I think bothers so many farmers because of our blood, sweat, and tears.
Yeah.
Every day, 7 days a week,
right.
365 days a year.
Yeah.
And then somebody saying the cost is too much.
Yeah.
But they have no problem stopping at our local coffee place that.
Not to go against coffee growers or anything else or
exactly.
wineries.
I'm not going against anybody in agriculture, right? But there's a markup.
Yeah.
And I'm sure they didn't pay 9 times 4 for that bottle.
Right.
I'm sure that they got it at a reduced cost, and somebody's making money along the way because now everybody else is making $20 an hour to work.
Yeah.
So again, it's how we put value on things. I think is the other important aspect to look at.
Well, I tell you, I do not bake and I do not cook, and I'm not good at it. And anybody who knows me knows that. But I do know, like, if you have a cake and it doesn't have an egg in it or it doesn't have some of those things, people can tell me it tastes better. It doesn't taste better, right? It just doesn't. And you can have an egg, whenever it says like eggless XYZ, and they say, oh, this is so much better for you because it's lower in this. It's like, yeah, but it doesn't taste the same, right? So it's hard to understand, like when you go out to eat and you buy this chocolate cake, and like you said, it's $12.99 for a slice of chocolate cake. There's a lot of stuff in there, including probably some eggs and some milk
and some
sugar
chocolate
and some chocolate, So yeah, I think that's a continued struggle for the professional agriculturalist, is to, find a way to make money and then be able to listen to the things that matter, and then maybe not listen to some of that other stuff because people value, I do some business now with a guy who does some beef, and people in the city will spend $60, $80, $90 a pound for some cut of beef because it's better. But is it better, or is it just beef, right?
Is it marketing?
It's marketing, right? So, it's really interesting, man. That's one of the things I love about agriculture is it's manufacturing, it's production, it's marketing, it's sales, it's distribution, it's
trades,
it's everything all in one. It's not. You're not just selling widgets,
Correct.
Which is kind of neat.
Correct.
Well, I know you and I were going to spend a little time together. We've spent over an hour together already,
Oh my
which
God.
is kind of cool. Goes by pretty fast.
Yeah, it does.
But we need to do it again.
Definitely.
That would be a lot of fun. And now you've seen the barn and you've seen our space, so you know how to get here. You know where the entrance is.
I do
You
know
come
where the
in
entrance
in
is.
rather than the out next time. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks, Mark, for having me. I really appreciate
Yeah,
it.
you're
And
welcome.
I appreciate being able to tell our story, not only about our farm, but about New York State Agricultural Society, because it is very near and dear to both of our hearts because, we work in this space and we are very passionate about our farms in New York State. And I think that the more people understand what real agriculture is, the better our society is.
Yeah,
So,
for sure.
Thank you.
For sure. Thanks, Jeannette.
Yeah.